That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The British Constitution provides that taxation and representation shall go together. Therefore, women taxpayers are entitled to vote.
I have a dream today. Let freedom ring, and if America is to be a great nation, this must become true.
Well, welcome everybody, and welcome back to Only Human. This season, season 3, we continue to focus on self-awareness or knowing yourself. And we've had some guests on in the past, and we've got another great guest today. I'll get around to introducing him in just one moment. First of all, I think it's really important that we understand the criticality in just about every decision we make of understanding where we are at the moment we make the decision. So we've talked a little bit about self-awareness. We talked a little bit about courage. We talked a little bit about fear with our guest last week. And we're going to expand on all of these and go a little bit deeper into some new areas today. So with that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about today's guest. He is, and I'm going to look down here because I'm reading it. He's retired Major General Colin Keiver, Canadian Air Force veteran with a remarkable career in aviation and military leadership. Born and raised on a farm outside of Three Hills, Alberta, his passion for flying took off early. I think you got your glider license when you were just 16 years old.
Yep.
General Keiver pursued his education with a bachelor's degree in political science, so we got something in common there. And a master's degree in defense studies. And he further honed his strategic thinking at the Royal College of Defense Studies in London, England. General Keiver joined the Canadian Armed Forces in 1991. And he's flown everything from Beechcraft Musketeer to the C-130 Hercules. His career has been marked by a lot of pivotal roles, including an exchange with U.S. Marine Corps. I guess the Air Force didn't have an exchange slot available, so you had to fall down the ladder a little bit there. He's had deployments to Afghanistan, Sudan. He also helped introduce the C-17 and the C-130J models into the Canadian Air Force. Throughout his service, he's commanded various units, obviously, including the 436 Transport Squadron and 8-Wing at Trenton, before ultimately serving as the Deputy Commander for the entire Royal Canadian Air Force. And today he joins us to share his experiences, insights, a couple of flying stories from over 3 decades of military service. So with that, welcome to the podcast, Colin. How are you?
Hey, Tony. I'm great, and thanks a million for having me here. Really excited to be here and quite frankly, shoot the breeze.
Yeah. So I guess I was trying to remember when we first met. I think it was at Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point. Was that it?
It was. You and the rest of your team were coming in to help us as we were transitioning to the J model in the Marine Corps, and you brought in that human factors perspective that we were sorely lacking.
Yeah, I can still see you were sitting pretty much in the middle, not in the front, but maybe 8 rows back, and you had a tough question. I can't remember what it was. Maybe we can get to that later. Hey, listen, I want to start. I think we're both pretty well steeped in command and staff college, war college, military history stuff. I'm pretty sure at one point in time you've read this book, right?
I have, yes.
So for those of you that are listening and not watching, this is Sun Tzu's Art of War. A lot of people don't know how long ago this was written. It was written almost 3,000 years ago. And one of the things that he said a lot of things. Sun Tzu's a lot like Clausewitz. Everybody likes to quote him. Nobody really reads him, right? And nobody goes into depth. And that really bugs me. So I took this quote, and a lot of people screw it up. But I'm going to read it verbatim, translated verbatim out of the Chinese, obviously. Know your enemy and know yourself, and you will not fear the result of 100 battles. Now, we hear that all the time. 1,000 battles, 1,000,000 battles. So he said 100, right? Know your enemy and know yourself. You will not fear the result of 100 battles. So he puts equal weight on understanding the challenge that you're facing and understanding yourself. I'm getting to a question here, Colin. In my time in the military, we studied the hell out of the enemy, right? And then all the ops research guys studied our quote unquote combat power. You know, how many of this, how many of that, how quickly can we move ammunition and fuel and all that stuff. But I can't, you know, with the exception of a little bit of very senior leadership training I got, the idea of knowing yourself was never really well developed, especially as a young officer. What was your experience with that? What do you think about that?
I think you're spot on. It mirrors my experience in the organization. Honestly, you know, you talk about capabilities in terms of aircraft and sortie generation rates. You talk about adversary capabilities. You do intelligence briefings, on and on and on and on. And I found generally over my career that learning about yourself and all those things that are human, they came through osmosis, if you will. They didn't come through any kind of formal program. And I'm struck by another great quote that I really love, you know, as we're sitting here talking about Sun Tzu, you know, and it's not nearly as old as Sun Tzu, but it goes back to the Red Baron, you know, when he wrote his autobiography in 1917 to wrote Kampfleger. And he's got a great line in there, too. It simply says, you know, the quality of the box matters little. Success depends entirely upon the man sitting in it. And it is all about the people. And, you know, so when I listen to the words of Sun Tzu, you know your enemy, know yourself, that's more than just the capabilities that enemy has and the capabilities you have. It's truly understanding your strengths and weaknesses, because at the end of the day, it's the people and how well they are able to gel as a team and work together and you know, persevere through really difficult times. That will be the determinant of success or not, Tony.
Yeah. So whenever we start talking military history quotes, I'll come back to you with one in just a second. But I want you to say that one again. So this was Richthofen.
Yes.
And he said, the quality of the box, please finish it for me.
Yeah, so the quality of the box matters little. Success depends entirely upon the man sitting in it. And it's fascinating because this biography, you can find it online now because it's over 100 years old, so therefore it's not subject to copyright and everything. It's been translated multiple times, but even he admitted, you know, that it was rather self-pompous and it was self-serving. It was written as a propaganda document during the war, but there's tidbits in there where you actually see him really come out as a person. And that line, to me, I've used that line repeatedly, probably over the last 20 years of my career, as I've stood in front of people and talked to them about these things and saying that you have got to know yourself. You've got to know what your strengths and weaknesses are. And if you've got 1 minute of free time, then you need to be figuring out how to use that 1 minute to make yourself better.
Yeah, so here's my quote. I'm a big Eddie Rickenbacker fan, and I know he's fallen from grace due to a lot of political correctness concerns over the last decade, but I still think he was one of the greatest commanders, not just military commanders. You could go before his military career when he was a race car driver, after his military career when he worked to create airlines, all sorts of stuff, rescued a group at sea who crashed. We can go on and on about Eddie Rickenbacker. But here's his quote, and it's when he was a squadron commander. And he was briefing. Actually, this quote came from the day that he would win the Medal of Honor. And the way Rickenbacker used to work is every new pilot that came into his squadron, he would sit down, give him the end brief. And in the end brief, he said this. He said, even the smallest amount of vanity can be lethal in this business.
Yes,
right?
Truly.
So from there, he would take off as the flight lead with all of the new puppies in his squadron, and out they'd go and fly around the area, and he'd point out things that they'd pre-briefed and all that stuff. On this particular day, they were jumped by a whole bunch of German adversaries. And Rickenbacker pointed to the field for everybody to go back, and he turned into the fight. And I can't remember how many he gets, at least 3, before he's damaged and has to crash land and crawls back to the squadron. And then conducts a debrief. Yeah, that is.
But and this is to me, that's the defining role of leadership in all of this, and I wasn't great at it at first. I found I was a little probably self-absorbed at first. I didn't listen to others very well. I think my family would probably still tell you I don't listen to others very well sometimes, but I think that was the one thing I learned through all of those years was that, this is where good leadership thrives, on their ability to teach, to mentor, to listen, to give them opportunities to learn something in a structured environment without, them failing so bad they never want to get back on that horse. It's all of those key pieces, I think, that are so essential to making this work, Tony.
Yeah, I'll take a little segue off of something you said there. I think we've both probably have a couple thousand hours of instructor time. And you said something there about not letting them fail so badly that they don't ever want to get back in. And as an IP, instructor pilot, that's tough because you're going to fly with people that the first time you're with them, you go, man, I don't know about this guy or this gal. It's going to take everything I can to get them through the program, get them qualified in the aircraft. And yet you realize at some point that you have to let them do enough wrong to learn, but not so much wrong that they get discouraged or even worse, exceed any of your safety criteria. And I used to say, and this is a self-awareness thing, that for every good instructor, the bell to intervene rings 3 times. And the first time is when the student begins to make the mistake, right? And so a good instructor has to let that happen. Unless it's really early in the syllabus, you want to say, hey, listen, we're getting a little close to the airfield, maybe you should start down, something like that. But that first bell, good instructors can ignore when the student starts to make the first mistake. The second bell is when the student is beginning to get in over her or his head, right? And then the third bell is when they're approaching your personal limits, right? And so the thing, and I also, and I suspect you did too, I was an instructor of instructors, so I was teaching other people how to instruct. And that self-awareness of where your own limits lie and the empathy to understand when they are getting in over their heads, that second bell is typically the time when you intervene verbally. And that third bell is the time when you intervene physically.
Yes. And I completely agree. And what I found, Tony, in my flying career was that I thought I was pretty good, when I was signing for the airplane, as an aircraft captain. And then, for whatever reasons, they decided to make me instructor. And then I found, actually, I became a better aviator when I became an instructor because it was no longer just about me. It was about actually being able to teach someone else what the right thing to do was, what the wrong thing was to do was, and most importantly, having enough understanding of what we were doing to be able to convey the whys, the context, that whole piece that goes with it. And then what was amazing was then when I became a check pilot, well, now that really had me have to up my game because I could not sit and evaluate someone and put their career on the line without completely having my ducks in a row. And so I just found that whole evolution just through that, it made me a better aviator, Tony.
Yeah, I absolutely get that. And I had all 3 of those roles as well. And it's interesting, though, that as an instructor and as a check airman, my stick and rudder time got shrunk, right? So I became less proficient. But yet, I also agree with you, I became a better aviator. Flesh that out for our listeners. How can you become less proficient at something and yet say you're getting better?
Well, so I think there's 2 pieces there. I was the same. I was certainly less proficient, in the physical hands and feet, those currency items. But my ability to sit in that seat and watch what was going on in that airplane and watch what was going on with that individual in that other seat, watch what was going on outside of the airplane in terms of that mission environment. What I found was the more I did that, the better I became at understanding that bigger picture and where we fit into that bigger picture. And I found myself thinking farther and farther ahead of the airplane as a result. And we used to joke, in the C-130J transition, that the pinnacle of situational awareness we had in that C-130J was actually, if you were using the systems right and that airplane was on auto throttle and autopilot and it was flying, whatever it was coupled, your ability to sit back and monitor systems while taking in that big picture, your situational awareness just increased exponentially. And I think that's kind of the same thing I experienced as an instructor pilot watching.
Yeah, for me, that whole evolution of my thinking was I never really thought about my own thinking when I was flying. I just flew. And I made some decisions, and some were good, some were bad, and then we'd debrief, and I'd say, oh gosh, I won't do that again. But when you have to get inside the head of a student, right, you begin to learn how humans think, which then you reflect and say, I remember making the same mistakes. And then those of us that are into continuous improvement, I wonder whether that still applies, and on, right? So the last thing I'll say about being an IP was that was the most rewarding time in my career. And I'll tell you why. Because we take off at 11 o'clock at night for a 4-hour night sortie, and the person that was in the other seat, either an aircraft commander upgrade or a first pilot upgrade, co-pilot upgrade, couldn't do something that we were going to train on. And when we came back and landed 5 or 6 hours later, he could do it. And that was because of what we did, right? So you actually saw real tangible progress on every flight. And you went in, you did the debrief, and on your drive home, you just felt good. And I don't know another job I've ever had that has that kind of real-time feedback.
I agree. And I think back to, when I was, as an instructor pilot and a check pilot, I towards the end there, I was doing a lot of, aircraft commander upgrade rides, in terms of they were moving up in various qual levels. And for me, the light bulb always went off, and it was almost always the same with one of these pilots. At some point in that training evolution, they would look at me and go, wow, this whole being in command thing doesn't really have much to do with actually physically flying the airplane, does it? And I go, aha, the individual has it. Good to go. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely. Listen, I want to change the vector here a little bit. We've been talking over the last few weeks about courage and fear, and you mentioned the term proficiency, and I have this little thought in my head that the more proficient I got, sometimes the more reckless I got, because I thought, it was I don't know whether I want to say a false courage or an unwarranted courage, but I didn't give the whole environment the respect it deserved. Have you ever experienced anything like that?
Very much so. I would say my experience mirrors yours. I found that when I became really, really, really good, I almost became complacent in certain critical areas, Tony, whether that was, making sure I knew, the dash one as well as I could, those key notes and warnings and cautions in there, things like that. Or even just maybe how I approached, mission analysis and mission preparation. Sometimes I've seen that 100 times. I don't need to focus on that one, and I found that was what I liked about some of my military flying was that, even in the United States Marine Corps with their operational risk management process that they've got, I found that when I got really, really busy and I was really proficient and, that complacency started to creep in, they put processes in place that force you to take 2 minutes and think about what you're about to go do, and it was a very rote checklist, you'd run through, crew day, crew rest, all those things like that. But I always found, and I brought that back to me when I came home to the Royal Canadian Air Force in terms of how I approached flying. I would always build into my schedule, no matter how busy or how proficient I was, I would always build myself a 2 or 3 minute gut check that allowed me to just step back and force myself to step back look at everything that just happened in the last 2 or 3 hours of mission planning. Maybe a talk with 2 or 3 key people. Did we miss anything? And invariably, 9 times out of 10, there would be something that would be like, oh, you know what? Yeah, let's spend 2 seconds talking about that and sorting that out. So I agree. I think it's a line in there of trying to figure out, how you strike that right balance. And that question you referred to all those years ago that I asked you in Cherry Point, it's still the same question. And I don't think there's an answer, but it's, how do you strike the right balance between, that proceduralization, that deliberate nature versus ensuring you haven't over proceduralized to the point of limiting or inhibiting the fundamental strength of humans, which is their ability to innovate and be adaptive and creative. Like you've got to strike that right balance between that creativity, yet a foundation underneath that gives them enough of a baseline that when they start getting creative, they don't go down the wrong road. And I think that's one thing, honestly, I've struggled with my entire career in all these transitions, as we've brought new airplanes on. Where's that right line? And it turns out, defining that right line on my experience has been, well, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of people coming together to determine what that group line is and agreeing where that line is, and then moving forward from there in terms of, common sense becomes common because you kind of structured it, you taught it, you evaluate it. I don't know. Your thoughts on that, Tony? Like, how do you strike that right balance?
Yeah. So I have no idea how I answered that question back 25 years ago. How long ago was that, man?
Yeah, that was 20 years ago. Yep.
I have no idea how I answered that question then, but I've learned a lot since then. And I'm going to approach it kind of in a weird way. I don't know how you strike the balance, but I know ways you shouldn't, right? And one of the ways is one way that aviation does and every other industry does, and that is Pilot X did this. Let's write a procedure so the rest of the pilots will never, ever do this again. So we over proceduralize, right? To the point where, a monkey, if you had enough bananas, could fly the airplane. So I know that there are organizations out there now, big organizations like Netflix, like the Koch brothers, both of whom I work with, that have no procedures. All they have are principles. Right? Now, they also don't fly airplanes, and they don't have Transport Canada or FAA or EASA looking over their shoulders. So we know we need some procedures. But I'm beginning to move more and more in this direction of principle-based operations. And you've already hit on a couple of those principles, right? Ask people what you've missed. Take the time to prepare. And I want to circle back to my question that launched this little furball here, and that was, as you get more proficient, do you get more reckless? And I think the answer to that is, absent principles, it is a tendency for humans to be at the highest risk at the very moment they think they're at the lowest risk because they've got everything taken care of. They're too good to make a mistake. This is too routine of a day to have something go wrong. So what do? Our vigilance closes in, our SA comes in, and then the unexpected happens, and there's bent metal and blood on the ground, or the equivalent of any other part of life. So I'll talked a lot. Any thoughts on that before we move on?
Well, I think, to riff on what you said there, I think, that principle-based is so important, because I think about what that does to, if you're working in an organization like that, that's got clearly defined principles, without being so rote and arbitrary on how it gets done, that becomes incredibly empowering. I think that makes those individuals in that organization even better, because you're empowering them. You're asking them to be creative and agile. You're not playing whack-a-mole with, dumb mistakes. You're truly allowing that organization to thrive as an organization, and the individuals in it feel empowered. And I think there's something to that, because I know, whether it's flying or it's the bureaucracy that exists working in large militaries, When you over proceduralize, that becomes incredibly demotivating, Tony. You don't even want to be a part of that system because you feel you have no individual freedom or ability to do anything.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We could talk about this for a lot longer, but I want to make sure we capture one or two more things. I don't know what it's like in Canada, but I do know what it's like here in the United States, and that is I am seeing more and more and more very senior people. I mean, talking, senior commanders of units of various sizes, government officials, senior non-commissioned officers being removed from duty for cause. Now, this has always gone on a little bit, but I think it's reaching epidemic levels. What is it? First of all, it may not be present in Canada, so I'm not going to assume that it is, but what is it? And I'm not going to say bad things about generation millennials or Zs either, but what is it today where leaders seem to be lacking the discretion, judgment, dare I say professionalism to stay in the seat, let alone lead well?
Yeah, so this is a great question. And I think it's no different up here. And I think it relates to what we were just talking about earlier. We've created systems that are rightfully so very complex systems. And we try to control those systems through, process or procedures or things like that. And to where we started on this, I think what's happened is we've taken the human out of this, Tony, to the point of, I think character at the end of the day matters. Your ability to interact with people, how you interact with people, how you treat those other people, whether or not you respect them in the right way, who's first, you or the people you lead, all of these things. And I think what most of us have done we've created systems that, because of their highly procedural nature, their highly bureaucratic nature, you've got 17 criteria you need to meet in order to be promoted. I think it's created a system that we promote and perhaps put people into leadership positions that meet all the ticks in the boxes, but maybe we have not done a great job of either evaluating things like character and morals and things like that, or we haven't done a great job of teaching them, because somehow we've presumed that all of this process is going to magically derive the right leader at the end of the day. And I think that's what's missing from it, is that human element, Tony.
Yeah, and I just could not agree more. There's a couple of things that you said that really struck me, General Lee. The idea that, do we have to teach morality and character? And I believe the way I grew up, that was taught by every adult I was around, right? It didn't matter if I did something stupid and my mom or dad wasn't around. I got my butt whipped anyway by whoever was, right?
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of blurry lines on what was right or wrong when I grew up. And I think those lines have blurred significantly. And I can't imagine a next door neighbor disciplining a child that wasn't theirs anymore. They'd end up in prison, right? So I think society has changed enough to where the moral fiber and character that you and I might have grown up with, these people have not been given that gift. And that's what it was, right? It was a gift. And we didn't think so at the time, but we sure understood it as we grew up. So if we're getting a group of leaders that might be absent a moral core, and you did mention the term evaluation, how do we address this, or can we address it at all?
Well, I can only speak to the military context, and you and I have talked about this before. We start that formal education too late in the career, Tony. My experience was, by the time I got to Joint Command and Staff College or the Royal College of Defense Studies, the reality is that, the people going through those programs have either figured it out or they figured out how to fake it. And in either case, the training they're receiving isn't really that relevant. And so I think you've got to start much, much earlier. And I was always struck by, certainly in the latter years of my career, when when I would go out to, the wings or the squadrons, or even, in National Defense Headquarters here in Ottawa, and sit in a room full of, younger service people. And we would have conversations around whatever the issue of the day was, and I would use it as an opportunity to start talking about this broader context in terms of, well, how do you anchor this against, the ethical principles of the Canadian Armed Forces, and your moral compass and things like that. What I was always struck by, well, we might disparage the morals and characters in society today. I was always struck by their willingness and their desire to listen and embrace what I was talking to. It's like they just needed to be exposed to it. It's like something was missing. And I think if we can figure out collectively how to put this earlier into their career and give them that framework, that moral structure, which relates to your earlier comment about principles, I think there's something in there, Tony.
I think so too. And, I think less information and more inspiration maybe early on with some very simple principle-based ideas that do have boundaries, right? Think of the other person first. Right? Think of the impact that you have beyond yourself. Think of, here's the best question ever, who else needs to know about this?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
There's so much secrecy. Well, Colin, I think we're about close to the end of our time here, but I want to give you the last opportunity to make any comments you want. If you're willing, we would love to have you back, and we will. I would love to come back and talk about just where we finished up there, and that was what would a principle-based, more junior progressive leadership program look like to make sure the character was there. I'd love to have another discussion on that, but just in general, overall, I'll give you the last word.
Thanks for that, Tony. I think, you're right. We could probably sit and talk about this for 3 days because it's fascinating. And at the core, to me, it's the people, it's the humans in this thing we call life. And, I was struck by, when I was the commander of all Canadian Forces personnel in the Middle East there, 2018 to 2019, I was struck by, we used to fly from Baghdad up to Erbil. And when you make that flight from Baghdad to Erbil, I mean, the land that you're crossing, I mean, this is a part of the world that gave us agriculture, it gave us the wheel, astronomy, modern mathematics, cursive script. Proof positive of what humans can do when they figure out how to work together to build something that's better than themselves. And yet today, a region that is proof positive of what happens when humans decide not to work together and come up with reasons to not do so. So to me, this being human thing is at the core of success and understanding how we make organizations great. What makes the Royal Canadian Air Force thrive, even though it's a relatively small Air Force, it's the individuals in it and whether or not we've empowered them and given them the tools to do the job we've asked of them. And I find this discussion fascinating.
Yeah, you and I both, and the people that are listening here are of like mind. So I guess we'll wrap this up. I'll summarize a little bit here. This 30 minutes went fast. We're still on the topic of knowing yourself, and down that journey, we talked about a few things. People get trapped in big systems where to advance means following checklists and procedures and scorecards in order to check all the boxes. And we talked about the possibility that the moral fortitude of people in general is being diluted around the world right now, and some of the results that we're seeing for that. And we're going to continue to have a discussion in the next couple of episodes about what we can do, most importantly, by ourselves, for ourselves, with the resources at hand, in order to make sure this doesn't happen to us. So, Colin, thanks so much for joining us here. Thank you all out there in listener land for listening. That's it for now. We will be back next week. We drop every Tuesday at 9 o'clock. Please like, follow, share. Sharing's huge. We're out there in over 50 countries. We want to make it 100. So share as widely as you can, and we will see you again soon.